We begin with White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Jake, thank you very much for being here with us. I want to get to all that's happening around the world, but first I've got to ask you about the news Trump made overnight appointing Kash Patel as the director of the FBI, or his intention to nominate him for that position. Patel listed you in one of his books as members of the executive branch deep state and one of the 60 corrupt actors of the First Order. Does this nomination concern you?
Well, I'm not going to speak to President-elect Trump's nominees. I'll let him and his transition team speak to that. I would just point out what the Biden administration did in approaching the question of the FBI director. As you know, FBI directors are appointed for 10-year terms, and the idea being that they extend beyond the term of any given president. And so we inherited an FBI director who actually had been appointed by President Trump, Director Chris Wray, who's continued to serve in that role through the 4 years of the Biden administration and served with distinction, served entirely insulated from politics or the partisan preferences of the current sitting president of the United States. This is a good, deep bipartisan tradition that President Biden adhered to, and that's really all I can say. As for me personally, I got 50 days left to continue to try to protect this country from threats, to continue to advance our national interest. I'm going to spend every day doing that and not worrying about other things.
But this is somebody who's talked about retribution, talked about the need, he suggests even prosecuting. He's saying that the Democrats, quote, should be very afraid, and again, named you as one of the corrupt actors of the First Order. So put aside the nomination to be FBI director, does this kind of talk concern you about what's going to happen after January 20th?
Well, look, like I said, John, I can't worry about after January 20th. I have to worry about until January 20th and the full spectrum of challenges and opportunities the United States has to advance our national interest. I'm the National Security Advisor of the United States. My job is to try to protect this country, to try to reduce the capacity of our adversaries, increase the capacity of our allies. We got a lot of work to do. And frankly, we're going to try to do that also in a way where we have a smooth transition with the incoming Trump team. And I have to say that I've been gratified so far by the coordination I've been able to have with the incoming Trump team. They seem focused also on a smooth transition because they want to be able to hit the ground running. So that is going to preoccupy me between now and January 20th, nothing else.
Yeah, how is that working? Because on the one hand, you obviously have a lot on your plate. You just had the ceasefire deal with Hezbollah. You're trying to work out something in Gaza with Hamas. You've got obviously all that's happening in Ukraine. At the same time, Donald Trump is meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau. He's got calls with the Mexican president, other world leaders. How does this work? I mean, you don't have two presidents at once, but you've got world leaders trying to work with both an incoming and an outgoing president. How does that coordination work?
Well, transitions always have a little bit of awkwardness to them because you have an incoming team with a different policy than the outgoing team. And of course, leaders around the world have to begin adjusting to that. On the other hand, there is one president at a time, and that president is President Joe Biden, who in fact is leaving this evening on a foreign trip to Angola, who has just negotiated a ceasefire in Lebanon, who is working actively on a ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza, who met with Xi Jinping a week ago and made a very important statement about AI and nuclear weapons. So we are working through a lot every single day. We just did got some Americans home from China. So we'll keep doing our jobs day in, day out. But we are going to work closely with the incoming team because so many of these challenges are not going to change fundamentally on January 21st. They're still going to be there, and we want to make sure that baton gets passed very smoothly. So far, I have to say, I think the coordination and the work together has been in good faith, has been professional, and has been designed to try to ensure that smooth transition.
What are you telling your Ukrainian counterparts about American support in 51 days after Biden leaves office?
Well, first, what I'm saying is we are going to do everything in our power for these 50 days to get Ukraine all the tools we possibly can to strengthen their position on the battlefield so that they'll be stronger at the negotiating table. And President Biden directed me to oversee a massive surge in the military equipment that we are delivering to Ukraine so that we have spent every dollar that Congress has appropriated to us by the time that President Biden leaves office. So that's first and foremost what we're focused on. And then I've encouraged the Ukrainian team to engage the incoming team as well as to engage all of our allies and partners because, again, on January 21st, the war in Ukraine doesn't just go away. Obviously, the new team will have its own policy, its own approach, and I can't speak to that. But what I can do is make sure that we put Ukraine in the best possible position when we hand off the baton.
Well, let me ask you about that. The New York Times reported on the various measures that you're taking to shore up Ukraine's defenses at this critical moment. And the article said this, quote, several officials even suggested that Mr. Biden could return nuclear weapons to Ukraine that were taken from it after the fall of the Soviet Union. That would be an instant and enormous deterrent, but such a step would be complicated and have serious implications. Is that something that's under consideration, that the U.S. would return nuclear weapons to Ukraine? Is that something you're considering?
That is not under consideration, no. What we are doing is surging various conventional capacities to Ukraine so that they can effectively defend themselves and take the fight to the Russians, not nuclear capability.
And are you seeing, there's talk about a peace process that, you know, Trump has now appointed General Kellogg to be his envoy to Russia, Ukraine peace process. And the idea here is that Ukraine would give up some of its land in exchange for peace. Are you seeing any indication that Zelensky is willing to do that?
Look, the key thing from my perspective is that Ukraine determine its destiny and its destiny not be imposed by outside powers, including the United States. Now, President Zelensky has made public comments about the need for this war to end at the negotiating table, meaning he knows ultimately there's going to have to be a negotiation. And in fact, over the course of 2024, we've been very engaged with President Zelensky and his team on what the shape of that negotiation could look like. And the key thing for this year was to try to give Ukraine as many tools as possible so that they could go into that negotiation and feel they could achieve the outcome that they would like to see. Now, as far as territory or security or other elements, I'm not going to speak to that publicly. I think President Zelensky should be the one who chooses to speak to that because ultimately it's his country we're talking about.
There had been a report that Trump had spoken with Vladimir Putin. I guess it wouldn't be surprising he's speaking with a lot of world leaders, but it's been denied by both the Kremlin and by Trump. Do you think that call happened? Do you have any knowledge of that?
I really don't know. I read it in the newspaper. I also saw the denials, so I honestly can't speak to it one way or the other.
Okay, and let me ask you about another big one. The president's made it clear he wants to have a ceasefire and hostage release deal with Hamas for Gaza. He's also suggested that he wants, before he leaves office, to have a broader Middle East peace deal that would involve a pathway to a Palestinian state and peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Do you really think that's something that you could do in the next 50 days?
What I would say is that the first step is getting the ceasefire and hostage deal. If we can get that into effect, then the possibilities for a broader diplomatic initiative in the region along the lines that you just described really open up. And we will use every day we have in office to try to generate as much progress towards that end as possible. So we are determined to try to move rapidly to get those hostages home, get a ceasefire in place, and then move on to this larger deal that we would like to see consummated as soon as possible, including, if possible, while President Biden is still president.
Okay, we've got to go, but before you leave, I have to ask you, are you prepared for life as a congressional spouse? Your wife, of course, will be sworn in as a member of Congress in January.
Well, I just have to say I'm so proud of Maggie, and she is going to serve New Hampshire and serve the country just exceptionally well, and I'm looking forward to supporting her every step of the way.
All right, Jake Sullivan, thank you very much.